Hey guys. So we're on chapter 7, Parrot in the Oven. Chapter seven's really, really long. So I'm going to split it into two and then we'll read it today and tomorrow. Otherwise, I think it'll take like 40 minutes and that's just too long for you guys to have to listen to me talk. So, I don't know if you guys remember chapter 6. He finds the gun. The sister is out like making out with her boyfriend, sneaking out of the house, and then he accidentally fires the gun and almost kills his little baby sister. So, pretty scary stuff. So yeah, that's where we left off. He felt really bad. His body was kind of exhausted from the thought of, him almost like murdering and shooting his sister. So, chapter 7, the boxing match. When summer ended, I was again at the same school. Mom's plans to get me transferred didn't work out. The administration said it was too late and there were already too many kids in that school. There was an imbalance in the student body, whatever that meant. They said lots of things, but it all ended with me not transferring. So I was sitting with my friend Albert Sosa, eating lunch on the picnic table over by the maple trees, when all of a sudden Lencho Dominguez came and parked his big beefy shadow above us. We liked eating lunch there because every day around 12 o'clock, one of the English teachers, Miss Vandermeer, would step out of her classroom and swoon our minds with the gorgeous way she'd fluff her hair and fix the collar of her ruffly blouse. Her legs dangled from the hem of her skirt like two shapely white bowling pins, and her shoulders were straight as a geography book. We acted like that wasn't why we ate lunch there, but it was. Anybody could see how cold it got. The wind already had glass edges to it, stiffening muscles and practically cutting through the stitches of our clothes. When it blew, the chill stabbed our teeth like icicles, and our voices jiggled every time we talked. Yet our eyes melted when Miss Vandermeer appeared at the door. Anyway, Lencho came over and eyed us like we were hopeless. He was dressed in Big Ben pants, starched stiff as ironing boards, and a plaid Pendleton shirt with the lap and tail out. Hardly a smile of a wrinkle showed anywhere. He cleared his throat with an exaggerated gutter. "You vatos are real screwy, you know that?" he said in his strep 30 voice. Rumor had it that Lencho stripped his voice by smoking cartons of Lucky Strike cigarettes and drinking Jack Daniels whiskey straight from a thermos bottle stashed in his locker. He leaned over and fingered about a dozen of Albert's fried potatoes. "That white bitch teaches a class of gavachos, and you guys hang around waiting to see her ass." "What do you mean?" Albert said, acting sore about Lencho thieving his potatoes. He knew better than to complain, though. No one complained to Lencho. I once saw him grab Mark Calavosis by the tits and squeeze until he grit his teeth and begged Lencho to please, please let him go. "You guys ever been in that room?" Lencho mumbled, snatching and pushing another load of Albert's potatoes into his mouth. "No," I said, pretending to not be interested. Actually, I must have wondered 1,000 times about what was behind that door. Daintily flicking salt from his fingers, Lencho did a curious thing. He wet his two fingers on his tongue, and pinching the crease of his pants, ran them down to his knee. He did the same with the other pant leg. We watched him with open-mouthed fascination. "Well, let me tell you, vatos," he said, finishing his grooming with a swipe of his pocket. "There's couches and sofas in there. You guys ever seen couches and sofas in a classroom?" He laughed, a sort of half-chuckle, half-sneering laugh. We looked dumbly at him, and he laughed again, only louder. "You vatos are screwy. You know that? You're a couple of real sissies." He didn't say it like an insult, but more a statement of fact. If he'd have asked us, we'd have agreed with him in a second. Compared to Lencho, everybody was a sissy. He had lumpy sacks of potatoes for shoulders, and even the weight of his breathing made you feel puny. He put his knuckle to his mouth and cleared a big wad of phlegm and spat it out. "I want to talk to you about something, Manny," he said seriously. "Do you think that maybe Bernardo might want to join my boxing team?" "I don't know," I said. "He's a pretty tough vato, ain't he?" "I guess so." "What do you mean you guess so? Don't you know anything about your own brother?" "He doesn't tell me everything," I said, trying to toughen my voice. I must have sounded whiny, though, because Albert ducked his eyes. It was the truth about Nardo. He mostly told me what he had done and how he had felt about what he'd done, but never anything about what he was planning to do or anything about what he wanted to do. If he thought about something, he'd ask me in a question, like, "Hey, Manny, do you think I should join Lencho's boxing team?" He hadn't asked me a thing like that lately, so I didn't know. "Well, anyway, ask your brother if he wants to join," Lencho said. He stamped his Stacey Adams shoes on the bench and walked away, eyeing his snazzy polish. That's when Miss Vandermeer came out of her classroom. She had a load of books crooked under her arm and was mangling a cluster of keys against her hip. As usual, there were some white students pattering like puppies behind her. She fished a key out and locked the door. Lencho walked toward her, tiptoeing with dignity, trying not to get any grass on his shoes. He hopped on the concrete walkway. "Hey, Lench," I yelled. "Albert says he wants to join. He says he could whip anybody in the whole school, even Boise. He says he'll even take on Boise." I got up and gave Albert's shoulders a champion's massage. Annoyed but not wanting to make a big commotion around a teacher, Lencho turned and shot a hidden screw you finger at me from his hip. Then, coolly deadening his face, he zipped past Miss Vandermeer, almost bumping her shoulder. As he passed, the white students cold stared Lencho like he'd just peed on the Queen of England. They weren't about to say anything, though. They knew his reputation. Besides, Miss Vandermeer pretended like she hadn't noticed a thing. That's the kind of teacher she was. Too pretentious to notice anything. That's when I yelled out, "Hi, Miss Vandermeer." It was one of those phony baloney highs that always comes out sounding smoochy. She turned around and automatically started to wave, and then recognized she didn't know who I was. She tossed a polite hand at me anyway, and her students hurried her away. "You jerk! What the hell did you do that for?" Albert moaned after Miss Vandermeer and her pack of puppies rounded the corner. He was steamed. He snatched angrily at his hair. He stood up, grabbed his books like he was about to huff off, then changed his mind and plunked them back down on the table. "Man," he said in a mopey voice, "now she's going to think we're a couple of idiots." "We are a couple of idiots, you idiot," I said defiantly. But I could see regret tightening on Albert's face. He was convinced we'd never get another chance to moon over Miss Vandermeer on the sly. But to me, Lencho was right. It was stupid sitting out there stuffed in a mountain of double sweaters waiting for some teacher to make a grand appearance. She paid us less mind than she would a wad of chewing gum stuck on the sidewalk. That much I could tell by the way she waved at me. I wanted to tell Albert this, but he was looking like he just got plugged on the shoulder with an arrow. "Man, Lencho's going to have it in for you," he said finally, perking up in almost a gleeful way, like he wouldn't be too sorry if Lencho knocked in my teeth. "He won't do anything," I said. "Oh no?" Albert stressed, anxious to prove me wrong. "No," I said. "He doesn't want to mess with Nardo." Oh yeah. He was glum again. He didn't have a brother, only a sister, and she'd as soon slap him in the face as smile. When you're like Albert and you don't have protection, any day of the week, on any street corner, a guy like Lencho can kick in your ribcage and nobody would give a damn. All in all, I thought it was amazing that Lencho even tried to spark up the Chicano guys to join his boxing team. Not that the Chicano guys couldn't fight or anything. There were a lot of ornery vatos around, but they just hung around and smoked and ditched class and acted like the school was some kind of contaminated nuclear zone. They'd never join any team that wasn't a gang. Lencho did recruit 2 suckers, though. One was a guy named Chico, a nice guy, but as my brother Nardo once said about him, the only shining he ever did came from his teeth. He could draw a neat picture of a naked girl and follow the numbers in a bingo game, but putting his finger on an algebra problem would probably burn him to ashes. Chico once tried out for the basketball team, but he was too short and couldn't dribble to save his life. When scratched from the roster, he blamed Coach Rogers, the basketball and boxing coach. The coach wore tortoiseshell glasses and talked in a marine voice. He had a head that reflected the sun and a blue-black carpet of hair over his muscular arms. Where Chico got the story, I don't know, but he said the coach once caught a Mexican guy frisking around with his daughter, and ever since then, he didn't like Mexican guys. The other fish Lencho hooked, and no one could believe it at first, especially me, was skinny boy Albert Sosa, my friend. I thought this was a pretty sorry thing for Lencho to do, considering Albert couldn't punch the air out of a soap bubble. Of course, it was a robustly stupid thing for Albert to do, since teachers lifted their eyebrows with appreciation when handing back his test papers. But Albert wanted to show something about himself. He wanted to impress his dad, maybe, who sat around watching TV all day, making fun of all the white actors, or maybe he wanted to impress Miss Vandermeer, who you could tell sent fingers of ice down his neck. I tried warning him. I tried explaining how ribs crack easy as dry twigs and how a punch sometimes welcomes paralysis. But he wouldn't listen. He practically begged to sign up, and you could tell Lencho was disappointed at such a scrawny catch. He wanted guys like Nardo and Sammy Fuentes, dangers known to everyone. But I think it was enough for Lencho to know that Chico and Albert would yank in whatever direction he pulled. They hung on his every word, and he could sure pump guys up with confidence. He belonged to this group called the Berets, older guys mostly, already out of school. Actually, Lencho was only a junior beret, him still being in school and all, but to him, being a junior beret was still halfway better than a plain nobody. The berets believed that white people were our worst enemy, and if they had one purpose in mind, it was to keep people down. We, on the other hand, were descendants of Indians, blessed with a color that was as necessary as dirt to the earth. As important as the sun to all the trees, we had treasures buried deep inside our blood, hidden treasures we hardly knew existed. This is the kind of stuff I listened to from Lencho, who figured if he made me his equipment manager and handler, then maybe Nardo would change his mind and put on the leather. For 3 weeks, I hung out with the boxers. Training was held after school in the weight room, where the guys bounced around, swiveling their necks, skipping rope, and running in place until wet as fish. Then, with faces swelling, they'd grown out a few dozen sit-ups. Lencho didn't let them lift iron because he said weights make muscles bulky, and they needed to be quick and springy in the exchanges. For equipment, we had an old hobo-looking punching bag and one of those rubber tether balls suspended on a bungee cord. On the first day, Albert hit the ball with a left, then came over, or tried to come over with a right. The ball snapped back in a wobble, and the cord gashed his fist. Between his two big knuckles, a flap of skin the size of a postage stamp opened a jagged eye. Unwinding a jump rope in his hand, Lencho told him to skip the day's training, but to stick around for the pep talk. He didn't mean that, of course. What he really meant to say was that Albert should show his fireball commitment by toughing it out. He didn't say this exactly. Lencho never said anything exactly. Instead, he coolly started jumping rope and talking about how real fighters never let little chicken shit like cuts put the coward's bite on them. After a long stare at the blood creeping under the Band-Aid he'd put on, Albert wrapped his hand in a t-shirt and began shuffling his feet around, jabbling at the air. One of the fighters in Coach Rogers' stable was a black guy named Boise Johnson. During training, Lencho took particular attention to stink up his name. Clapping his hands, he'd roughen his voice and say we were going to pluck him like a chicken, crush him like a pasta shell. These put-downs were meant to lift the guy's confidence, but both Chico and Albert blessed their skinny bones they weren't going to fight Boise. There was also a feud going on between Lencho and Coach Rogers. The coach didn't appreciate him mavericking fighters on his own. He was a former Golden Gloves boxing champion, and he considered that a big deal. I think every student at J. Edgar Hoover High knew the coach was a Golden Gloves boxing champion. Even in junior high, I remember knowing, and I think even my dad knew. And my dad didn't give a rat's ass about anything that happened in my school. Coach Rogers selected his fighters from those who scored highest on the school's physical exams, which included climbing the high rope and squat jumping and running wind sprints until our lungs collapsed. But he depended mostly on who could lift the heaviest weights or repeat the lighter weights the longest. This torture of selection dragged on for about 2 weeks, after which the guys who scored excellent were given free gold trunks to wear and were invited later to join the football, basketball, and boxing teams. The guys who scored average could buy purple trunks with silver trim to announce their standing. Those who scored poor, like me, had to wear those gray gym trunks like a flag of shame. What mostly fired us up, though, was Lencho's inspirational talks. He spoke with braids of lightning in his voice, saying stuff he'd learned in the berets about Mexicans and Chicanos being a special people. How power slept in our fists, and we could awaken it with a simple nod of our heroic will. He piled it on about being proud, about how marvelous it was going to be after we pulverized those other guys. Lencho could really swell the chest muscles. After a couple of weeks of watching punches pop deeper into the bag and guys skip blurs on the jump rope, Albert actually hit the tether ball 4 swipes in a row. I began to get a little swell-headed about our chances. Sure, at first I was a bit leery since those other guys were bigger and could cross their arms when jumping rope, but they weren't any better than us, not really. One day, while walking over by B Hall, I was surprised to hear my name called from behind. Manuel, Manuel! It was Miss Vandermeer. Bustling over, a pile of books shoved up against her breasts, she was walking in that cute pigeon-toed way that used to make Albert and me do crazy rolls with our eyes. Do you think Leonard will win the contest? She asked, stopping in front of me. She began to busily shuffle the order of her books on her chest. Yeah, I guess so, I said. He's pretty confident. Yes, I noticed that about him, she said, waving a finger in the air. He's a regular hotspur. A hot what? I asked. I thought maybe she was talking about some kind of bull sticker or thorn. Hotspur, in Shakespeare, you know? I must have looked blank because she got this disappointed frown on her face. Well, it's not important, she said matter-of-factly. Her face was sprayed with sun freckles, and with her fingers she delicately crooked back her bangs. She was beautiful, with swirls of glowing sunlight floating on her hair. I was going to grab her free hand and shake it, but she started fiddling with the bindings of her books. Anyway, she said, you tell Leonard for me I wish him all the luck in the world. Will you do that, Manuel? She made her hand straight as a ping-pong paddle and patted me a couple of times on the shoulder. My heart lumped in my throat, and when I said, yeah, sure, Miss Vandermeer, My voice was thick as oatmeal. Of course, I didn't tell Lencho anything. He'd probably have spit at my shoes and said, "What a bitch." He'd probably say something nasty, too, like why was a dog like me still sniffing after her tail? He talked like that sometimes when he wasn't getting all glorious about the Mexican race. Not until Miss Vandermeer walked away did I wonder how she knew my name. I figured she must have asked someone or looked it up in the administration files. Whichever way, I could tell by her eyes that she knew something about me. But then I'd found out some things about her, too. For one, she wasn't one of the regular teachers, but a sort of extra teacher for the white students bussed in from Almany High. I also found out about the couches and sofas in her classroom because I asked the janitor, an El Salvadorian man who once worked with my dad in the onion fields. He scratched the back of his neck and said he thought it was like a teacher's lounge. What all this has to do with the fight, I don't know. Usually I didn't like thoughts about teachers browsing around inside my head, but Miss Vandermeer was special. I hoped, in fact, that by some wild card of luck they'd transfer me over from Mr. Shatler's class, where all we did was read magazines and play bingo games, to hers, where students read detective books and stuff by that Shakespeare guy. Except for Albert. The guys I hung with thought even if they flicked through the pages of a book, ink would rub off on their hands and mark them sissies for life. I could imagine them in a classroom like Miss Vandermeer's, getting all cushy on the couches, throwing spitwads at her butt. So that's about halfway. We'll stop there today. I will post this in Google Classroom with the question for the first half of Chapter 7, and then we'll read the rest tomorrow. Okay? Bye, kiddos.